Those who claim to like modern art, who defend it, look upon classical art, which represents beauty and meaning, and call it pompous. And they call those who defend it, those who say that old art, real art, is better than modern art, snobs and elitists for preferring it over modern art. But in fact, it is the people who like modern art who are the real snobs, because they have backed themselves into a corner where they now have to defend what is complete rubbish and say that it is on the same playing field, on the same level as real art. They've decided that all things are subjective, that there's no objective means of saying that one thing is better than another. They say the same thing about music, but because of this, they have to continue pretending that rubbish is good. As the years have gone on and the public has been confronted with increasingly worse modern art and expected to accept it, the modern artists and those who defend them have continually dug themselves into a deeper and deeper hole. Because they began by saying that Andy Warhol produced art, they had to agree that Tracey Emin did too. Anyone who isn't in the know is either confused by what they have been presented with as art, or is sensible enough to laugh at it. But of course, if you do choose to laugh at what is clearly rubbish and deserves to be laughed at, then you'll be swarmed by the truly elitist snobs who will call you elitist for saying that what they pretend to love is the rubbish that it is, because they can't afford to have their lie broken. You see, it's all a big subconscious cult in effect, where the power of the modern art is only maintained so long as everyone continues to believe in it, which is why they can't afford to have this facade come crumbling down. If you've ever been to a modern art gallery, you'll know that it's basically best described as an assortment of scrap metal arrangements, weird machines that blink and fizz at you, demonic arrangements of pseudo-human figures bent into perverse positions, and sprayings and splatterings of paint worse than a toddler could produce. It could not be a more different experience than the one which you will get if you go to a real art gallery, because all of the things in a real art gallery share one thing in common, and that's beauty. They might represent different things, but they represent beautiful things, they represent meaning, they represent things which can actually be understood, they represent things which tell us something about ourselves. In other words, real art lifts the viewer up. It makes him transcend, it makes him experience things in a higher way, it makes him feel more connected with his surroundings. But modern art does the opposite. It makes the viewer question himself. The modern art looks down upon the viewer, whereas real art looks up at the viewer. Because modern art looks down upon the viewer, it isolates him, it makes him question whether he's going mad, and it dares him to oppose it. It is a dehumanizing experience, and it's dehumanizing because it's ugly, it's stupid, it's pointless, and that's all made worse because you're meant to take all of that and pretend that it is good, nodding along with the rest of the fools who pretend that by looking at Tracey Emin's bed, they've somehow been enlightened, somehow their experience of the universe has been enhanced. And this is the really tyrannical thing about modern art. It makes us, or it expects of us to lie, to say that good things are bad and that bad things are good, or that all things are equal, that there's no such thing as better. We experience something with our senses, we see that the modern art is terrible, and yet we are expected to say that it is good. We have in effect been gaslighted into saying the opposite of the truth, into repeating the party line. Let me give you an example or a comparison. If you've read the book 1984, you'll remember the scene where the protagonist Winston is being interrogated by O'Brien in room 101, and O'Brien repeatedly holds up 4 fingers and asks Winston to tell him how many fingers he's holding up. And every time Winston says 4, because that's what he sees, O'Brien gives him an electric shock. And the shock keeps increasing until finally Winston says, okay, 5, you're holding up 5, even though O'Brien's still holding up 4. And Winston receives another shock, and O'Brien says something along the lines of, no, you don't understand, Winston. You're lying. I know that you're lying. You don't really believe that there are 5. What we're going to do to you is we're going to get you to the point where you will tell us anything that we want to hear from you, and you'll really believe it in your heart. In the end, O'Brien tortures Winston to the point where he's willing to say that 2 + 2 = 5, or 4, or 6, or whatever it is that O'Brien wants him to say. Winston will believe it. You see, the concept of an objective reality, of truth itself, of facts, is a threat to authoritarians, and it's a threat to the modern artists and those who defend them. Because while ever there is some kind of objective scale, some kind of definable means by which we can say that this thing is good or that that thing is bad, while ever we can rely on our own senses to tell us the truth, they can't convince us otherwise. But as the quality of modern art has degenerated even further and become more deranged and meaningless and pointless, and people are continually nodding along with it and expected to go along with what's going on, we have become the sorts of people who repeat the party line. They expect us to look at modern art and say certain things about it. Whatever we're expected, it might be that, this piece of art explores an important political reality, or this piece of art makes us question the meaning of beauty, or this artist has redefined this certain art style. All these kinds of pseudo-intellectual terms that they're using to make what is rubbish seem better than it really is. It really is all just a big con, and many of the artists who are doing it because it's easy. It requires no real skill, and they actually make quite a lot of money from it. If you look at Andy Warhol, for instance, Andy Warhol was a modern artist. From the outside, that seems to be what he was, but when he died, and they looked at his estate, they went to his houses were full of what? Modern art? No, they were full of classical art, of real art. It appears to be the case that the tastes which he represented outwardly were not the tastes that he actually had within, in privacy. Even the people who produce this rubbish know that it's rubbish, but they expect you to accept it. Thankfully, I think this has to come to an end. Not just because I think that I believe in the basic idea that truth wins in the end. I believe that. I take that as an article of faith, if you like. But I think just looking at the way things are going, it's only getting more and more ludicrous and demented and satanic and obviously pointless. I think it will get to the point soon where almost everyone has to come to terms with the fact that it's total rubbish. Like when the Soviet Union collapsed, and after all these decades people had been living in this lie. They'd been going along with the authoritarian regime and been afraid to say what was true. They'd been afraid to call good good and bad bad. They'd been expected to call good bad and bad good, or whatever the party wanted them to say. And it will be the same thing here with modern art. Like in the Soviet Union, once everything came crashing down and everyone realized that they could breathe air and say what the truth was, and the whole establishment fell apart. I think it will be the same thing with modern art. We'll get to a point where eventually everyone agrees that it's rubbish, and we'll hopefully at that point be able to trace back through time and find the point at which it all began and draw a line through it and say, this is rubbish. From here onwards, this is all rubbish. And then back here, this is the real art that's actually beautiful, that any person can look at and understand. You might not fully understand it, maybe it does require some deeper thinking, but real art makes you feel something. It actually uplifts you. It portrays real meaning. Modern art is purposefully confusing and shocking and disgusting. That's its entire purpose, which is why it has to increase the degree to which it is disgusting, because the whole aim is to be shocking, and you cannot be shocking if you produce the same thing over and over again, which is why it degenerates indefinitely. Whereas real art, you notice, is refined, the skills and the methods are refined throughout the centuries, but very slowly. It doesn't seek to shock, and you can produce many different things in the same style about different topics, about different subjects, and they can all be as good, they can all be meaningful and worthwhile. Whereas modern art, the value of modern art is only in its difference from the past, in its desire to avoid being kitsch. But yeah, I think soon the public's capacity to continue with this lie will have been stretched too far, and we'll all have to admit that it was a complete load of rubbish, and we'll be able to do away with all of it. At least that's my hope.